Hey guys, welcome to today's episode. I'm here in my house in Spotsylvania, and I'm glad to be spending some time with you, talking today about one of the most misunderstood verses in all the Bible. Hope you'll join us for today's episode.
Welcome to Everyday Truth with Kurt Skelly. We believe the Bible is true and relevant to everyone, everywhere, every day. If today's conversation is a help to you, take a moment to leave a review or share it with a friend. Thanks for listening. Now, let's join Kurt for today's episode.
Hey guys, welcome. I'm in my living room here in Spotsylvania, Virginia, and glad that you're joining us here for a couple minutes for the podcast today. We're in Matthew chapter 7, which is still the Sermon on the Mount, and we're in a little section here at the beginning of Matthew 7 that is really misunderstood. It's almost this new generation of, hey, whatever you want to believe is good and ought to be approved and celebrated. If it works for you, let's just be tolerant of all other opposing viewpoints and treat them all as if they're equally valid. And nothing could be farther from the truth. In fact, to understand the Bible is to understand that our God makes very exclusive statements. For instance, John chapter 14 and verse 6, where Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life. No man can get to the Father but through Jesus. That's a pretty exclusive statement. But when you understand that God has made exclusive statements, but he's willing to include everybody under his conditions, like whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved, then we understand. It is actually loving and kind to be very defined in the way that you understand and preach truth. So here in Matthew chapter 7, Jesus makes this statement. Look at verse number 1. He says, judge not that ye be not judged. And that's kind of like the moral high ground today. Well, don't judge me. Don't judge me. Don't make any negative comments about the lifestyle I choose or the decisions I make or the priorities I have. Don't judge, bro. Kind of is the mantra. Is that what the Bible is teaching? Is the Bible teaching that we can never make a discernment, or that we should never lovingly have confrontations, or that we should never in any way speak against another person's lifestyle in that sense? And of course, the answer is no. In fact, the Bible enjoins us over and over again to be loving confronters, insofar that we have relationship, insofar that we have influence, insofar that we have authority. We are called to make judgment calls, to make discerning statements to people in our lives. We're called to that. So what could this possibly mean then? Where Jesus said, judge not that ye be not judged. Well, first of all, I think in verse number 1, what Jesus is giving us here is a summary statement or an encapsulating statement. Judge not that ye be not judged. So the commandment is don't judge. That's not the commandment. The commandment is don't judge in a way that you would not be willing to receive judgment in your own life. So judge not that you be not judged. And the verses that follow will make this very clear, because with whatever judgment we judge, we shall be judged. So this is not a prohibition about making discernments about other people's behaviors or actions, or even in some cases, confronting them. The issue here is, with what spirit do we do it? Do we do it with a condemnatory spirit? In the sense of condemning others, none of us has any moral high ground. In fact, the Bible says in James chapter 4 that there is one lawgiver who is able to save and to destroy. Who art thou that judgest another? So in the sense of making a final condemnation of a person's life, which means being judge, jury, and executioner, none of us has that prerogative. But in the sense that I am making a confrontation or making a discerning statement about a person's wrong choices, then the Bible says I should do that in the spirit of how would I want that done to me? Because with whatever judgment, well, look at it, verse number 2. For with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. And with what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you again. So it's kind of like the golden rule, where Jesus is saying, treat others, even in situations like this, where you are detecting something in their life that is sinful, or detecting something in their life that is harmful, but be careful that the judgment that you give, that means the decisions to which you're coming, the censure that you bring upon them, or the measuring stick that you're applying. Just make sure that you're willing to have that same measure applied to you. Isn't it interesting that we are so good at recognizing the sins of others, and we are typically so legalistic when it comes to the application of punishment or a retribution for what others have done, but then when it comes to me, well, I don't see it as readily. When it comes to me, I want mercy. I don't want that judgment. So the point here is, let your heart be right. Have a better understanding of yourself and of sin before you begin to make those assessments of other people. Look at verse number 3. And why, Jesus said, why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye? So obviously Jesus is using hyperbole here. He said, why would you detect a speck in somebody else's eye and not deal with something much larger in your own life? I think about David as a prime example of this. David saw the speck. He saw this man that stole someone else's sheep, and he was more than willing to exact judgment. This man ought to die for his deed. He ought to repay fourfold. And yet Nathan was careful to say, David, I'm talking about a much more egregious sin. Not stealing a sheep, but stealing a wife. Not killing a sheep, but killing a human being. And David could see the speck, but he could not see the beam in his own eye. And therefore, he could not render righteous judgment. So the point here is that the speck in other people ought to cause us first to consider ourselves. Knowing this, that it's much easier to see in other people that which we would never condone for ourselves, but there's a blindness when it comes to ourselves. So here's a good rule of thumb. When you see something that bothers you about somebody else, your first reaction should be, but do I do that? Maybe not in that exact same way, but do I do that same thing? Sometimes even in bigger ways. Lord, show me me. Instead of asking for God to give you courage to get the other person right, ask God to give you discernment to see in what ways you need to be made right. So here's the point. The point is, oftentimes we see ourselves best when we see ourselves first in other people. So I see that speck, okay, but that ought to remind me, well, maybe there's something in my own life. So that's what Jesus is saying here. And he says, so first, this is the priority, first deal with your own issue. Now, your own issue might have been brought to light by what you see in other people, okay, but deal with it. Deal with that beam in your own eye. And then, the Bible says, look at verse number 4, how wilt thou say to thy brother, let me pull out the mote of thine eye? And behold, a beam is in thine own eye. Thou hypocrite, you're just a play actor. Thou hypocrite, first, here's the priority, cast out the beam out of thine own eye, and then thou shalt see clearly to cast out the mote out of thy brother's eye. See what Jesus is saying? Jesus is not saying that we should never judge, because verse number 5 makes it clear. No, we ought to be able to help our brother. Sometimes we will see things in other people's lives that need for us on the sidelines of their life to point that out. But what Jesus said is you're not seeing clearly unless the faults of others are first causing you to look at yourself. So look at the faults of others, first of all, as a mirror. before you look through the lens of judgment at what they've done wrong. Because the Bible says that when you can allow the sins and faults and foibles of other people to cause you to self-assess, to cause you to deal with your own issues, then you're going to be in a prime position to be able to see clearly. And the mercy that we give ourselves, let's face it, we give ourselves a lot of mercy. The grace that we give ourselves, boy, now all of a sudden, as we look clearly at other people, we're going to have that same kind of grace, aren't we? That same kind of mercy. And we're going to be able to lovingly come alongside of them and help them with that speck that's in their own eye. Well, what a great way to look at truly how to confront, truly how to help other people with things that are truly wrong in their lives. Would you look at verse number 6 in closing, where it says, and I think verse number 6 is attached to this teaching, because it says in verse number 6, give not that which is holy unto the dogs. So in modern culture, we think about a dog like a pet. We love dogs. We don't like cats. But there are some exceptions. So Friendly the cat and others that have made their appearance here on this podcast, you're the exception. But as a general rule, I like dogs and don't really like cats. But back in Bible days, nobody liked dogs. Dogs were scavengers. They weren't there as pets. You would never have a lap dog or put a sweater on a dog or have a dog sleep on your bed in Bible days. So give not that which is holy unto the dogs. You would never take good food and give it to a dog. A dog digs in the dump. The Bible says here, neither cast ye your pearls before swine. We even people that don't know the Bible understand this verse, lest they trample them under their feet. They won't value. A pig can't value a pearl and turn again and rend you. So how does any of this have to do with judgment? I think in this way, that when we are right with the Lord and we've dealt with our own issues, then we ought to be in a position where we can help people with our words, to lovingly confront them or to lovingly share with them the gospel, which involves pointing out their sinfulness and showing them the mercy and grace of our God in the gospel presentation. But the Bible teaches that when it becomes clear that a person is not receptive to the gospel, not receptive to words of truth, not receptive, it would be like a dog or like a pearl that is not understanding or receptive to this pearl. And the point here is we have to be discerning even in the people to whom we give the truth, to understand that sometimes we're just spinning our wheels when there's a predisposition on their part not to receive. So ask for the Lord's wisdom in two ways today. Number one, ask for the Lord to give you wisdom about seeing yourself in ways perhaps that you cannot see yourself. Understanding that sometimes the first glimpse of ourself is what we don't like in other people. And maybe that's the case today. Maybe you're seeing things that really bug you that other people do, but really what's happening is those things are revealing something bigger in your own life. So ask for God's discernment and wisdom. But then I would say, number two, that insofar that you've done that and that you do see clearly some things in others and some needs in others, then be careful because people aren't always ready and willing to receive the things that we say. So let's make sure that we're spending our time introspecting, allowing God to do that work of grace in our own lives, and then being wise about the people with whom we share truth, and the people sometimes whom we lovingly confront, to know that we're not casting our pearls before swine. Well, that's it for today. We're going to stop there in verse number 6. We'll jump into some more principles about prayer next episode. Appreciate you joining us today. God bless you, my friends.